Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin analyzing the Hindu newspaper for today, an important reminder. Tonight at 8 p.m. live on our YouTube channel, you will have the live explained session where we will be discussing the freebies debate in and out. We will be discussing the various points of views on the freebie debate. Is it justified? Is it not? So on and so forth. Do join us live for that session right here on the YouTube channel at 8 p.m. Let's begin with the first article that is actually about the same topic which will be discussed in the explained session today, that is the freebies. The author here is a professor at JNU, and he says that the entire debate of the freebies that has erupted once again after the Prime Minister a few weeks back talked about the freebie or the revdi culture, this debate is missing out on a very important point. The author here says that subsidies are not just those that are actually given to the farmers or that are given for medical or health purposes. Actually, the government of India favors a lot of other people as well, which we tend to ignore. These are called tax preferences. A lot of times you would see the government of India following policies of giving up tax or something that you call the tax break. Tax break is kind of a policy initiated by the government to give a boost to the companies who want to set up their big factories or manufacturing houses. The government of India to the corporate sector offers a lot of tax incentives. For example, not taking tax for some time from the startups or allowing concession on certain taxes. As per the author, that is also subsidy. So why is it that we only blame the farmers, we only blame the students or the education loan or health, etc. for government spending, when the government is also letting go of all its revenue in favor of the corporates as well? So he says that while the debate of freebies is good, but the debate for freebies has to be much more holistic, and we need to look at each and every aspect of the word subsidy. Now, if you look at the Indian laws, there is no proper definition of the word subsidy. But if you look at what WTO says, you will find a proper and legal definition of subsidy. WTO's agreement called Subsidies and Countervailing Measures define the subsidy as deemed to exist if there is a financial contribution by the government or any public body where the government practices a direct transfer of funds. So this can be a kind of a farmer subsidy or, for example, giving free electricity. These come under this particular definition. Then the definition also says, or government revenue that is otherwise due is foregone and not collected. That is also a subsidy. This second part of the definition is mainly important with respect to the corporate sector, and in India we ignore this part. You would have seen that when the government of India announces policies for startup companies for making it easier to do business in India, they offer a lot of tax breaks. They tell the companies come and deal in India and we'll not take taxes for some time from you. This is also a part of subsidy only if you look at the second half of the definition. The government is foregoing its own revenue. The interesting part is before 2015-16, if you look at the union government budget, the union budget actually had a heading which said revenue foregone. In this heading, the government of India actually gave a detail of how much money the government of India did not collect, which it should have collected. This is from the corporates also, from income tax also. This is a kind of a tax break only. But after 2015-16, this heading is not mentioned in the budget. Now, there can be multiple reasons for it. Maybe the government does not want to accept it publicly that we are foregoing any revenue. So, after 2015-16, in the budget, the title given to this section is Statement on Revenue Impact of Tax Incentive. So, they have actually made it slightly complicated. Rather than simply writing revenue foregone, they are mentioning these kind of things in the budget under this particular heading. So the author says that even the budget makes a mention of this revenue foregone. Now, what you have to understand is the author is not saying that the government should not give tax incentive to the corporates. Yes, every country around the world gives certain tax incentive to corporates, to individuals, to give a boost to the economic development of the country. No one is saying that we should take it back. The point to be made here is that when we have a debate on subsidy, we should include each and every aspect of it. If you're having a debate and saying that the freebie culture is wrong, and you are saying that farmers or normal people should not get subsidy from the government, then you should include in that debate the corporates also, the startups also. It should not be a one-sided debate. If the tax preference is given, it should be considered at all the different levels. The author says that as per the CAG reports, there has been a very drastic change in the amount of revenue the government has actually let go. For example, the CAG says in 2010-11, 21% of the direct tax revenue which the government could have earned in favor of corporate tax, income tax, 21% or one-fifth of that the government let go. In 2014-15, it decreased to 15%. But again, by the time of 2019-2020, this is again 22%. So over one-fifth of the revenue that the government could have earned more from direct taxes, the government is letting go. That is what the important point here is, and this number is much, much higher than any of the other subsidies offered to the farmers, offered to the students, in some cases, offered to hospitals, etc. So that is an important part of the debate that we are actually cutting down. That is also a freebie only. The corporate tax cuts that we have seen in the past few years, in 2019-20 also there was a corporate tax cut, that is also freebie. Now, let me tell you one more side of the story. When the government cuts corporate taxes, what is exactly the government's thinking? So let me give you a very simple example. Let's assume the government is charging 30% corporate tax from a company. That is, whatever profit the company makes, 30% of that shall go to the government. Now let's assume government says, okay, we are reducing it. Now we are reducing it to 20%. Now you only have to pay 20% tax to us. Now the question is, why does the government do so? It is obviously a loss-making thing for the government. The government is earning lesser money. The objective of the government is, government believes that since we are taking lesser money from the corporates, means corporates will have more money in their hand. That more money in their hand, they will use as an investment in their business. They will expand their business, they will set up more factories, and thus they will employ more people. So more people will get jobs indirectly. And when more people will get jobs, the economy of the country will improve in the long run. That is the entire objective of any corporate tax cut throughout the world. It is not to directly benefit the corporates. It's an expectation and it is a hope that the corporates will not keep this money in their pocket. Rather, they will invest it in their business and they will expand business and give more jobs. However, this is a very, very optimistic view that the government takes, but in reality, it does not happen. That is what the author also is saying. That the government expected more investment with tax cut, but it did not happen. We did not see any more investment. Whatever tax cuts were given by the government, the corporates actually kept that money in their own pocket rather than expanding their business. That is a big, big problem. On the other hand, as per the author, the subsidies in the field of health, etc., should in fact increase. India's public health expenditure is still very, very low, just 1.5% of the GDP, much, much lower than many other economies. Even our expense on education is extremely low. The public investment in education should have touched 6% of GDP, which is a target which is as old as 1966 Kothari Commission and has still not been met. So on one hand, we are ignoring one big part of the debate of subsidy, that is a subsidy given to the corporates, and on the other hand, there is a need to ensure that on the critical sectors of the economy, there is much more investment that comes in from the government side. Now, let me just share with you some numbers as per the government of India, numbers about revenue foregone. As I discussed, revenue foregone means the amount of money that the government could have collected more but did not because the government gave exemptions. In 2018-19, this figure was over 1 lakh crore. In 2019-20, this figure was again very close to 1 lakh crore. This is the amount of money that the government could have earned more. Then even the startups, as I said, have been getting tax holiday. Tax holiday means for some time, for some years, the government will not collect taxes from the startups' profits. All these are under the category of revenue foregone. Again, I am repeating, it doesn't mean that the government should not give these kind of benefits to the corporates. Yes, the government should give these benefits to expand their business, but at the end of the day, we should not then blame the other side only. Now, if you look at the countries in our neighborhood especially, and you see the corporate tax. In India, corporate tax right now is 22%, which is lower than many of the countries in our neighborhood, lower than Japan, lower than even China. So if you actually see, India has reduced its corporate tax with a hope that corporate will now invest that money in expanding their business. But whether it happens or not remains to be seen. This is how the government gets most of the money right now. GST, corporate tax, and personal income tax, so on and so forth. So corporate tax fills in the government's kitties in very, very large numbers. The next article that we have here is about a good news coming from Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Nadu government, after the orders given by the Madras High Court, has come out with specific terms that will be used to address people who identify themselves as lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, or any other orientation. Now, this was notified by the Department of Social Welfare and Women Empowerment in the state of Tamil Nadu. Now, since these are Tamil names, I would rather not pronounce them because I might offend some people who are from the state. So, these are the words that will actually be used in the state of Tamil Nadu. Let me try and pronounce at least one of them, and I apologize in advance if I don't get the pronunciation correct. For queers, for example, the word that will be used is Pal Pudhumayar. There are other words also that have been identified in the state of Tamil Nadu. Now, this is a significant step ahead because the people belonging to the LGBTQI community have often been harassed by using different types of slurs which they never appreciate. And that is why the government coming ahead and giving these particular words to be used to identify these people is a good step ahead. Although it came only after intervention of the High Court of the state, but still it is a step in the right direction. There have been multiple cases filed in the past also from the people of the LGBTQ community asking for protection because they have been unfortunately physically and mentally attacked by many sections of the society. The Madras High Court, in fact, gave a number of guidelines to the police and the social welfare ministries at the state and the central level also to provide adequate safety to the LGBTQI community. Now, in the past, if you would have seen, there have been multiple cases in the Supreme Court and the High Courts across the country with respect to the rights to be given to the LGBTQI community. For example, in February this year, the Madras High Court had pulled up the union government for not releasing the list of those NGOs who are working for the community's welfare. In 2018, the Supreme Court bench had overturned the 2013 ruling and decriminalized homosexuality. So, in short, we are going ahead in a direction which is actually in favor of the LGBTQI community, where the society is accepting the rights that this community has, and there have been strict laws made against discrimination of this community. Those people who have been working as activists for the rights of the LGBTQI community are very happy with this decision, and they believe that similar kind of initiatives should be taken by state governments all across the country. Now, this also gives us a chance to look at other laws and orders that have been passed by the judiciary in the past, especially with respect to the LGBTQI community. Before we do that, one more thing that was in the news, not just India. In fact, the community faces discrimination in many, many countries across the world. And that is why ILO, that is the International Labour Organization, recently came out with a directive that the nations across the world should ensure that the LGBTQI community do not get any discrimination in the terms of work being offered or the working conditions. Another thing that was in the news, it just happened a couple of days back. Vietnam, Singapore, these countries also eased their laws for the LGBTQI community. Singapore, Vietnam, for example, these countries had very strict anti gay laws and they were eased very, very recently. It was in the news, and I hope that you would have read that as well. Now, as I said, coming to India's initiatives in the past, specifically for the welfare of this community, there have been multiple Supreme Court and High Court initiatives and government policies as well. Let's look at some of them. In 2014, there was a case called NALSA, that is National Legal Services Authority versus the Union of India, in which the Supreme Court observed that recognition of transgenders as a third gender is not a social or a medical issue, but it is a human rights issue, means it is much, much more important. Then in 2018, we have the Navtej Singh Johar case, under which Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality by striking off Section 377 of the IPC, saying that these go against the fundamental rights of the LGBTQ community, and Article 14 guarantees equality before law to everyone. The Supreme Court also said that Yogyakarta principles on the application of international law in relation to issues of sexual orientation and gender identity should be applied in the Indian law as well. These are international principles that were outlined in 2006 in Indonesia by a distinguished group which fights for international human rights. Then in 2018, we had a Supreme Court case with regards to the same sex marriage. The Supreme Court observed that the choice of a partner is a person's fundamental right and it can be a same sex partner as well. Thus, thankfully, a much more liberal view about the LGBTQ community has been taken by the Supreme Court and the High Courts in the past decade or so. And this step by the Tamil Nadu government is one of those steps in this direction only. The next article is actually an interview taken from two very esteemed personalities about whether or not there is a need for India to change its policy on the Rohingyas. Now, Rohingya issue is not a new issue. It has been in the news for past 5 to 6 years. But the reason why it is in the current news is that, if you remember, Union Minister Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri recently had tweeted that the Indian government will provide housing in Delhi to the Rohingyas who are actually living in Delhi. However, the government of India quickly clarified that no, we will not do anything like that, and Rohingyas are still illegal foreigners and will be deported to Myanmar as soon as possible. Now, the interviewees here are giving their view about this issue and about whether or not India needs to have a proper refugee policy in place. Now, as we have discussed earlier as well, India is not a signatory to the UN Convention for Refugees. However, India has a very good record when it comes to refugee protection. India has had a history of giving protection to refugees irrespective of whichever nation they have come from. In comparison, even the nations who have signed the UN Refugee Convention, even their record is not as good as India. So many people believe that India does not need to be a part of this UN Convention and does not even need to have their own refugee policy because India has actually highlighted a behavior which is an example for many nations. This is what the interviews also are saying. India's record on refugee protection is actually exemplary. We have a history of hosting thousands of refugees coming in from different nations, including Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, so on and so forth. However, with the Rohingyas now, the issue is slightly different. And there are multiple reasons for that. Number one, there is a kind of a feeling in India that Rohingyas are actually taking up jobs from the Indians and they are a burden on the Indian economy. Secondly, we also have people who are accusing the Rohingyas of being a security threat in India. Because India, just like many other countries, has been impacted by international Islamist terror in the past few years. And thus, the Rohingyas, because of their religion, are also being seen as suspicious. And that is why the government of India is not very eager to let them settle permanently in India. And this is where, as per the authors, a refugee policy could be handy. So, if the government has a refugee policy, what will happen is then on a case by case basis, the government will not have to decide what to do with these refugees. If we have an overall policy in place, everyone knows how to apply for refuge in India, what will happen, will the permission be given, will the permission not be given, so on and so forth. But in the absence of such kind of a policy, what happens is that it actually gives a free hand to the government to decide whether or not to accept certain refugees, whether or not to not accept certain refugees. And this is what leads to a lot of confusion. That is why people have been saying that there is a proper need to have a refugee policy in the country. Now, many people have another point of view. As you know, Rohingyas were actually forced to leave from Myanmar. So people say if India has good relationship with Myanmar, as with many other nations in our neighborhood, why is it that Indian government is not talking to the Myanmar government directly and asking them to take the Rohingyas back? Why is the Indian government not putting pressure on the Myanmar government? Now, the fact remains that Myanmar is a very crucial neighbor for India. Myanmar shares land boundary with most of the northeastern states of India, and thus India does not want to jeopardize its relationship with Myanmar because the safety and security of the northeastern states in India is very, very important for us. And a lot of insurgent groups in northeast India actually go and take refuge in Myanmar. So, in order to fight against them, we need the support of the Myanmar government. So, while on one hand we do believe in the cause of the Rohingya community, but it doesn't make sense for India to jeopardize its relationship with Myanmar to bring up this topic and to bring the Rohingyas back to Myanmar. So, that is a choice that Indian government has made. Rather than forcing or requesting the Myanmar government to take the Rohingyas back, we have always made it a point to improve our relationship with Myanmar because for us, the safety and security of the northeastern part of India is actually much, much more important. Now, you might also know Rohingyas are not just in India. When the Rohingyas were forced to vacate Myanmar, they were actually settled in many countries in our neighborhood as well. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all these nations have certain Rohingya population. Bangladesh has also been credited with responding very, very positively and asking the Rohingyas to come and settle in Bangladesh. Although there are some issues with that also, and we'll discuss that. Issues such as the island in Bangladesh where the Rohingyas have been asked to settle is an island that is very, very prone to flood and it may come underwater anytime. And you are not really sure how long would the Rohingyas be able to live there. But at least in the international community, the response of Bangladesh has been appreciated. India, on the other hand, has nothing to prove to anyone because, as I said, our record of protecting refugees since our independence is much, much better than any of those nations who has even signed the UN Refugee Convention. Now, I'm sure by now you have read a lot of details about the Rohingyas and all of you are very well aware of who are Rohingyas, where do they come from. But just to share with you a few details once again. Rohingyas are ethnic groups that belong to Myanmar and they mainly live in the Rakhine province of Myanmar. They are Muslims mainly and they speak a particular dialect of Bengali, which is not really the Burmese language that is spoken by most people in Myanmar. The UN has actually recognized them as a most persecuted minority in the entire world. They don't have citizenship of any specific nation. In fact, in 1982, the Myanmar nationality law specifically said that Rohingyas will not be given nationality of Myanmar. So they don't have citizenship of Myanmar. They were forced to go out of Myanmar in 2017 after violent clashes. Many of them were killed by the Myanmar army. Most of them went out of Myanmar and settled in Bangladesh's city of Cox's Bazar, after which they settled in many other parts of the subcontinent, including India as well. Recently, Bangladesh has started shifting them to an island called the Bashan Char Island, which actually is very, very prone to the floods. This is the Bashan Char Island. If you actually see, this is so dangerous that this island did not even exist 20 years back. It is said that it was only 20 years back that this island actually surfaced when the water levels declined. And in the month of June to September, when this is a monsoon season, there's a very good chance that the water will again come up on this island and the people living there would be in a very, very dangerous situation. So, yes, Bangladesh has offered them a place to settle down, but how safe that is, everyone is asking this question from Bangladesh as well. This is another infographic which shows you the history of the Rohingyas. It's a very, very old history, although the Rohingyas are forced out of Myanmar recently, but the history actually goes back way back to the 15th century when the Muslims actually first came and settled in today's Myanmar in the 1430s. Also, the first time that the Rohingyas were targeted in Myanmar was actually 1962 when Myanmar launched an operation with the help of its own government called Operation Dragon King, which specifically targeted the Rohingya people, forcing them out of the country of Myanmar. The next article that we have here is about the recent meeting of the Joint River Commission between India and Bangladesh, where a lot of issues were discussed, specifically about the sharing of rivers between India and Bangladesh. Now, this meeting was held under which it was decided that the two sides will try and collaborate on this matter and will ensure proper sharing agreements. In simple terms, no concrete agreement was signed. It was just an official meeting that was about maintaining cordial relationship and resolving the water disputes. Now, if you actually look at India and Bangladesh, there are a lot of rivers that are shared between the two sides. And in most of those rivers, India is the upper riparian state and Bangladesh is the lower riparian state. Means most of these rivers first flow in India, then they go to Bangladesh. So in short, it depends on India how much water are we allowing to actually be sent to Bangladesh. This is why the lower riparian states like Bangladesh always want a water sharing agreement to actually legally force the country to give at least that much water. Between India and Bangladesh, there has been a long discussion on the Teesta Water Agreement. Teesta is a river that originates in Sikkim, then goes to West Bengal, then goes to Bangladesh. Bangladesh for a long time has been asking for India to sign this agreement, but India has not done this so far. Also, this meeting that was held recently was actually mostly focused on one river called the Kushiara River from Assam. This river came in the news because of the recent floods in Assam. It is said that the main focus of this meeting was about the water sharing of the Kushiara River. So, what India has said in the past many times is that we cannot share with you the Teesta water. So, let us make agreements on other smaller rivers. Because Teesta goes through West Bengal. West Bengal has its own demand of water that is very, very high. So, that is why rather than focusing too much on Teesta in the last few years, the two sides have been trying to come together on agreements on other smaller rivers, and Kushiara water sharing agreement is one of that. If you look at India-Bangladesh water sharing dispute, it's a very, very old issue. It's not just about the Teesta River. As I said, many rivers are shared between India and Bangladesh, with India being the upper riparian state in most of them. The issue started even before Bangladesh was born as a country. Bangladesh was still East Pakistan when this issue started. In 1961, for example, India constructed the Farakka barrage, which was to be operational by April 1975 to divert some water in the dry season. See, when the monsoon season is on, then no country, India or Bangladesh, has any problem with water. The problem of water sharing only happens in the dry season. India began the planning of the project, but then Pakistan, that was East Pakistan at that time, started raising concerns. But finally, the two sides decided to come together and make an agreement after Bangladesh was formed. Also, in 1972, India and Bangladesh established something called the Joint River Commission. The same commission recently held a meeting which is covered in the Hindu newspaper. In 1974, the two sides acknowledged that yes, we need to ensure that the river Ganga is shared between the two sides, and thus the Farakka Barrage Agreement, the Ganga Sharing Agreement was actually signed between the two sides. However, Teesta River has still not been resolved. Now, I'll tell you a very interesting incident of why exactly was the Teesta River Agreement not signed. See, politics in India is very, very interesting. As you know, before 2014, most of the governments in power at the center government level were the coalition governments. So when Manmohan Singh was a prime minister, it was a coalition government supported by Mamta Banerjee, who was the West Bengal chief minister. Now, this incident took place in 2011. In 2011, our Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh visited Bangladesh. And the plan was that when he goes to Bangladesh, Mamta Banerjee, the West Bengal Chief Minister, also will go with him and they will sign the river sharing agreement, that is for the Teesta River. Why Mamta Banerjee? Because West Bengal actually has most of the water of the Teesta River. But what happened was just one day before leaving, just one day before the Prime Minister had to leave, Mamta Banerjee actually indirectly, did not even call herself, her Chief Secretary called the Prime Minister's office and said, the Mamta Didi will not go with you. And she actually ditched the Prime Minister on the very last day. Prime Minister of the country had to go to Bangladesh, but the agreement was not signed. This was covered very, very widely as how can a Chief Minister actually do this to the Prime Minister of the country. But this has been a history of the Teesta River. It is because of West Bengal government that the agreement has not been signed. West Bengal government says that their requirement of water is very high. They can't promise sharing of water. Center government, on the other hand, has to decide. Number one, we need to have good relationship with Bangladesh. It is very, very important. Secondly, the parties ruling West Bengal are usually the ones that support the center government in a coalition government. So that is why this issue has remained unresolved. And also, if the Indian government signs this agreement, people will start blaming how can central government give preference to Bangladesh over the requirement of its own state of West Bengal. That is why, in short, the Teesta sharing agreement has still not been signed. The river, as we discussed, starts in Sikkim, goes to West Bengal, and then it becomes a part of Bangladesh. It originates in Himalayas in Sikkim near Chunthang and flows to the south, entering West Bengal. The dispute, as I said, is mainly about how much river water would be shared between the two sides. Bangladesh wanted 50-50 distribution, that is equitable distribution, just like the Ganga water sharing agreement of 1996. But West Bengal Chief Minister and the Indian Prime Minister also has never agreed to 50-50 distribution. So this is still an unresolved issue. These were the important articles on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Discuss the need for India to have an official refugee policy in the wake of the ongoing Rohingya crisis in the Indian subcontinent. Second, revenue foregone is nothing but a subsidy given to the corporate sector. Comment. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.